कंप्यूटर के पास नहीं? जी सर, कोई कंप्यूटर के पास है? हाँ पवन है। हाँ पवन पवन संजय सर क्या वो किसी बात है?
वो डायरेक्टर साहब ने
सर अभी चला है एक्चुअली वीडियो के लिए ये ऊपर उठाना है एक्चुअली के बाद इसका टाइम बता देंगे ना ओके आई थिंक वीडियो चलाने के लिए फिर से बैनर को ऊपर करना है फिर नीचे करना है इसलिए हम
कर
Manna is the chairman of Research Council of CSIR-NML Metallurgical. He is well known face. He is former director. Yeah. We have one more RC member here, Savita. And so it's a very fortunate occasion that we have RC chair with us and RC member also with us. And with all distinguished persons around us to inaugurate this poster session of this 1 week Manda program.
The posters are all by your
Yes.
NML scientists?
Yes.
Abhish, you also joined me?
So please view it.
That's it.
कौन सी?
You're no longer connected with your
There is a choice. I can continue.
that 6 years will end this year.
Extension process is also going on for that's very long.
Hello. Yeah, good. I mean, all the known faces are gradually disappearing from very.
Coordinator for Gita.
It's a lot from your own side.
Yes, we are from students.
Maybe in quarters.
Students who are doing project here. Directly, they are associated.
Why you say academia? Why is that? Why is that
Several activities. One of the activities connect.
not necessarily your ACS.
So rather this is
Good morning all. We would like to acknowledge the presence of our honorable guests. Students and faculties, please be seated. The roots of education are bitter, but the fruits are sweet. Aristotle. The foundation of every state is the education of its youth. Diogenes. A very good morning to all. I am Dr. Prem Kumar Murugayan, host for today's program. On behalf of CSIR-NML, it gives an immense pleasure to welcome you all to the academia event under 1 week, 1 lab campaign of CSIR. We would like to assure you, today's events will give you lots of learnings, so please enjoy the rest of the day. It is important to read the safety pass. This auditorium To express our gratitude, I request our director to welcome our chief guest with a floral bouquet. Nothing can be reassuring and heartwarming than affectionate words of welcome. To formally welcome us to the event, I request our director, Dr. A.K. Srivastava, to give his welcome address.
Good morning. Namaste to all of you. We are fortunate to have today with us Professor Indranil Mannaji, the well-known face for CSIR National Metallurgical Laboratory. He is the chairman of Research Council of National Metallurgical Laboratory. He is professor of IIT Kharagpur, former director of CSIR Central Glass Ceramic Research Institute, Kolkata, former director of Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and at present Vice Chancellor of BIT Group, Birla Institute of Technology Group. So he has seen the world from science,
Good morning,
academia,
Namaste to all of you.
management, and
We are
basically
fortunate
by
to-
heart, as I understand from my student life starting, that he is a scientist, true scientist. So he is the most appropriate person to have as a chief guest of this academia meet. So let us have a applaud for our own Professor Mannaji. He was asking me that what is this academia meet in this program. So basically this 1 week, 1 lab program, actually it was the idea of Honorable Minister Science and Technology and Earth Sciences, Dr. Jiten Singh Ji, in last Foundation Day when we met on 26 September in Delhi, to have 1 month, 1 lab program of CSIR labs to showcase our strength in terms of legacy, exclusive innovation, and technological breakthroughs. But then when we have 1 month, 1 lab program and without overlapping of the labs, then it will take on 36, 37 months. So some lab will get chance after 3 years. by that time many scientists will retire, many directors will retire, and so on. So then it got reduced to have 1 week, 1 lab program. And under that, then every lab got a slot. And we tried to do our best to see that there should not be overlap between the functions of 2 labs. So the slot for CSIR-NML was given between 24th April to 28th April. And we are fortunate that the inauguration was graced by Honorable Governor of Jharkhand, His Excellency Shri C.P. Radhakrishnan ji, and our own head of family, Director General CSIR and Secretary DSIR, Dr. N. Kalai-Selvi Madam. So from that point we started. Today is the last day of the program. And as we all know that NML is known for ore extraction, alloy development, component health to waste recycling, including e-waste management, and many things. Whatever you talk about metals and materials, we are working in this lab, National Metallurgical Lab. Several programs have already happened, and now today it is academia meet to disseminate and to share our knowledge with other institutions in and around Jamshedpur and in Jharkhand. And we are fortunate that in addition to our chief guest, we have our RC member, Tamita, here, and other distinguished faculties here from CSIR, Kolkata, for giving the lectures. And we have students and faculties, our own faculties and the faculties outside from NML for this occasion. And so I am sure that this academia meet, after the lectures and the panel discussion, we will definitely come out with some new ideas which we are looking for. That after dissemination and sharing of the knowledge, we should evolve with something which can give us something new for future. So that is the idea of this program. And in brief, this is what I wanted to share. Once again, I want to welcome all of you on behalf of CSIR-NML and also on my personal behalf to this very important program of Academia Meet under one lab program of CSIR-NML. Thank you. Namaste. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. S.K. Tiwari, Chief Scientist and HOD, Advanced Materials and Processes Division, to brief about Academia Meet and introduce our chief guest.
Good morning. Professor Manna, today's chief guest, Dr. A.K. Srivastava, Director CSIR-NML, Dr. Raghuveer Singh, Chief Scientist and today's program coordinator, Professor Pant, our RC member, Professor Sayan Bhattacharya, one of lecture we will heard from him, faculties, students, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Union Minister of Science and Technology, who happens to be our Vice President of CSIR, he has launched the campaign 1 week, 1 lab of CSIR in January 23. Under this campaign, each of the 37 labs of CSIR spread across the country will showcase exclusively their innovations and technological breakthrough to the people of India, one after other, in the successive week. This was aimed to ignite the minds of young innovators, students, startups, academia, and industry to look for opportunities through deep tech ventures. CSIR-NML is participating under this campaign in the week 24th to 28th April by organizing several programs at different places such as Ranchi, Jamshedpur, and Chennai. Today is the last and fifth and final day on which CSIR-NML has organized Academia Meet to fill the gap amongst academia such as faculties, scientists, researchers, and industries. The objective of the program is to bring all the stakeholders to a single platform and deliberate most recent innovations and challenges in the area of minerals, metallurgy, and materials. The program includes today lectures by eminent personalities covering future research prospects in metallurgy, energy materials, evolution of metals, and glimpse of CSIR and particularly CSIR-NML contribution towards society and nation. Also there is a poster session on metals and materials for growth of nation by students of colleges in and around Jamshedpur. In the post-lunch session, there will be a panel discussion to deliberate on role of CSIR-NML in supporting the scientific pursuits for the development of society. So, today's meet will certainly disseminate most recent knowledge on metals and materials and motivate young minds to take the challenge in this area. Now, as we know, our today's chief guest is Professor Indranil Manna, and I have proud privilege to introduce him. Though Professor Manna is not new to NML family, but for the sake of students and faculties coming from outside, I will just briefly introduce him. Professor Manna, a J.C. Bose Fellow of DST, and currently the Vice Chancellor of BIT Mesra, Ranchi, obtained his Bachelor of Engineering degree from Calcutta University, BE College, in 1983, M.Tech from IIT Kanpur in 84, and PhD from IIT Kharagpur in 1990. He was a Premchand Roychand Scholar in 1992 and a Mott Medal awardee of Calcutta University in 1999. He is an educationist and materials engineer with wide ranging of research interests covering phase transformation, structure property correlation, and modeling in new and nanometric metals and ceramics, laser plasma assisted surface engineering, nanoferrofluid, and magnetic steels. He teaches subjects related to physical metallurgy and surface engineering. As a guest scientist, he has visited extensively some of the institute abroad, Max Planck Institute at Stuttgart, Technical University of Clausthal, Liverpool University, Nanyang Technological University, NIMS Japan, Unipress Poland, and University of Ulm. He has published more than 300 papers and guided 30 doctoral students. He is a fellow of all the National Academies of Science, INSA, IASC, NASI, and Engineering in India. He was both a dad and Humboldt Fellow in Germany. He is recipient of World Academy of Sciences TOS Prize for Engineering Sciences in 2014 and was elected a Fellow of TOS in 2015. He is also a member of the Asia Pacific Academy of Materials. He received the CSIR Medal in 2000, Binani Gold Medal 99, G.D. Birla Gold Medal 2008 of IIM, AICTE Career Award for Young Teachers 95, INSA Medal for Young Scientists 1992. And in addition to that, he was felicitated by the Ministry of Steel with the Young Metallurgist 1991, Metallurgist of the Year 2002, and National Metallurgist Award in 2018. He is a member of the research boards of several industry and R&D institutions like RINL, GAIL, BAIL, ARCI, Ministry of Steel, and serves in several national level committees and boards of DST, DVT, CSIR, SERB, INSA, etc. He is the former president of Indian Institute of Metals and vice president of Indian National Academy of Engineering. University of Kalyani and Kazi Nazrul University have conferred DSc honorary degree on him in 2017. He served as director of CSIR CGCRI Kolkata during 2010 to 12 and IIT Kanpur during 2012 to 2017. With this brief introduction, may I request Professor Manna to deliver his talk.
Can I operate myself from here?
No, sir. We are connected to TV also.
Oh. So this is the one.
Okay.
So let me get started. Very good morning to all of you. Director Acting of CSIR-NML, Avnish, I know for a very long time since his student days. Dr. Tiwari, our good friends from NML, Meeta. Actually, I mentioned this to Avnish that it's very scary because all the known faces are gradually disappearing from NML. So my association with NML dates back many decades. And I'm being a metallurgist, NML is almost like a temple to any, and that too I grew up in the neighborhood, BE College and IIT Kharagpur. So I've been, if I correctly recall, my first visit to NML was when I was actually a student. We came for a industry visit to Jamshedpur, and that was the first occasion when I could step into this very famous laboratory. And since then, so that should have been in 1970, maybe 81, 82, around that time. Many of the youngsters here weren't even probably born at that time. So I should time to time remind myself that I'm no longer that young. But to my young friends here, I would like to share one or two words about CSIR. I don't know how much you know. Even if you know, there is no harm in repeating. 1942 was when CSIR was born. So you can very well imagine pre-independence. And suffice to say that CSIR is truly the cradle in which Indian science and technology post-independence grew. All the big strategic sectors that we hear about today and who make us immensely proud had something or other to do with CSIR before they actually graduated as separate entity. Atomic energy, defense, even to some extent space, Indian Space Research Organization. So when Raghuveer called me and said that you have to come for this, I readily agreed. And only thing is these days, life has become very demanding, and at times, in certain span of time, I find myself traveling almost every second day. So it becomes very difficult to organize. But I live not too far from here, so and also it's on the way to Kharagpur, so I readily agreed, and I'm happy to be here. But at the same time, this is probably the first time I'm coming to NML when the likes of Indranil Chattaraj and Soumitra Tarafdar or many of my good friends are not around. But good to see that Preeta, one of our RC members, is here, and also Shayan Bhattacharya, one of the very promising academic from CSIR Kolkata. They also are going to address. So I would like to make use of this right, okay, yeah. So actually, I was given a very difficult topic. You know, it is not my own choice. I was told that you have to talk about something which should be addressed and we should consider them to be the real challenges. Now, I don't think I'm really that competent to talk about the future challenges that the country has to negotiate with. But as a metallurgist, as a materials engineer, and as someone who has a passion for science and technology, I thought I would share with you my own thoughts about it. So, like Dr. Tiwari mentioned, that I can wear two hats, IIT Mesra, and I still retain my position at IIT Kharagpur. So I intend to talk about some of the challenges in a few of these sectors. You know, I initially thought of covering more, then I realized time is a constraint. So I'll talk about iron and steel, transportation, defense hardware, energy harvesting devices, and then aviation and space, just some of the representative sectors. But while preparing for this talk, I realized that maybe in the next few occasions, I would like to learn myself more and then gradually expand my own understanding. And wherever I get an opportunity, I'll try to explain to this what are the challenges, what should the younger generation should embrace and lead towards providing solution for the future. So I must also compliment CSIR for this very good initiative of 1 week, 1 lab. Initially, I too had difficulty in understanding what is this OWOL. So the whole idea is to reach out. If you are seen as scientists or technologists as an exclusive group with some esoteric ideas and you do something no one knows outside your laboratory premise, then you are you're kind of isolated from the society. So the principal theme, what I understand from the director NML and Dr. Tiwari, that CSIR wants to come closer to the society and explain as to which way CSIR is committed to making a difference to the lives of the common men in this country. Let me add my own explanation as to why CSIR is very important. Science basically most of the time I'll be addressing to this side of the audience, the younger ones. In my simple understanding, science is a very simple exercise of asking yourself or around you a question, why? So anything and everything, if you simply ask why, that's exactly what you're doing as science. And it is not necessarily, today you must be also aware of subject domains which are called computer science. Why is it not computer engineering? Because of very fundamental questions from which it emerges. Similarly, we say material science, even economic sciences, social sciences. So why we use the word science is because when we address the principal theme of why, then it's science. And moment you translate from why to how, then it becomes engineering. So when I try to figure out that why certain objects behave in a particular way, why some natural phenomenon occurs in a particular way, plain and simple, why should the sun rise in the east and not to the west and so on. Whether you're going to use it or not, nobody knows. For example, I often give an example that no one has ever seen whether an apple actually fell on Newton's head. But Newton was the first guy who raised a very fundamental question that why should apple fall and not go up? That led to the laws of gravity. And today you can't do any mechanics without the laws of gravity. So Newton never said that you have to use it for this or that. He was more interested in the fundamental question, why? No why. But when you make use of that and then defy gravity and send your satellite to the orbit, then you're actually making use of it and you're learning how to do it, and that's engineering. So all these areas that I've chosen, they are essentially certain sectors. I'll try and define as to what are the challenges that needs to be. So CSIR basically is the cradle in which both the know why is pursued and at the same time know how gets understood. So translational research for that, this is the organization which has the oldest and the most distinguished track record. So all of you who happen to visit CSIR laboratory should remember that. Where is, how am I going to change? Okay, this side, no? Right. So this is a collage of, at random, I mean, I picked up a few, I could have picked up something else. The whole idea is to show you in 3 compartments, the metals, the ceramics, semiconductors, part of ceramics, polymers. Now, if anyone asks you, what are engineering materials? Any material in any state, gaseous, liquid, solid, if you make use for any engineering purpose, it qualifies to be engineering material. The water we drink is not an engineering material. The water we use in a boiler is an engineering material. So if I reduce them to the solid state, condensed matter, then you can think of them as aggregate of species, atoms, ions, molecules, radicals, whatever. If they maintain long-range periodicity, then you say crystalline. That means you have exactly, you know, a priori where they should occur. If they don't maintain long-range periodicity, then you call them non-crystalline or amorphous. Now, whether crystalline or amorphous, all of them as an aggregate, we as engineers, we don't deal with a single atom. That's for the physicists, chemists to deal with, or subatoms and so on. We deal with aggregates. And when the aggregates exist, they certainly are talking to each other. They are maintaining a group. And how do they maintain the group? There are 3 possible ways. One, when they transfer the electron, and that class of solids, you call them ceramics or sometimes semiconducting materials. They basically are based on ionic bonding. They could share the electrons between them. So that's the class of materials which are called polymeric materials, and the typical bonding would be covalent bonding. Or else they can exist as an aggregate permeated by free electron cloud. The electrons don't belong to any one of them, belong to everybody. So in such a situation, we call them metallic materials. So in pure form, all solids in condensed state can exist, should exist in one of these 3 possible ways. But in nature, you never find them in pure form, except few mercury, gold, or few others. So all of them are mixed. All of them appear in various combined form. And these combinations, sometimes we call composite, sometimes we call them hybrid, and so on. But the engineers know how to win the important, valuable species from whatever form they exist in nature. For example, iron oxide is an oxide. That's how Mother Earth preserves the precious resources. But you walk into Tata Steel, they know how to reduce iron oxide and extract iron out of that, and then allow a certain amount of carbon to go into solution, and that's how we make steel, and which we use all over the places. So, so these are the classes of materials that make up the world of engineering, and why it is important, because now the right side of this collage, I have chosen 3 items: a fancy automobile, a high-speed, I don't know whether it's Vande Bharat, but certainly one of the high-speed trains, an aircraft, a fighter jet, and I've also chosen an ocean liner, which goes from one country to another, can go across the big oceans and so on. These are examples of systems. Engineering is all about providing solution and system solution. So when you look at your laptop, you know very well that it certainly has many, many components. But if you rip it apart and then see how many components make up an automobile or an aircraft or something, you'll find hundreds, thousands, maybe more. And many of them are very different type, very different origin, very different functions. But when you actually want a complete system which is self-sufficient, then you have to know how to combine them together. And that's you develop an engineering system solution. And that takes a lot of effort. And this is much beyond engineering, not just engineering. You have to take into account the economics part of it. You have to take into account the social science part of it, the recycling, the energy, various other factors. So this is what we aim. No, not here. The laptop is sitting there, no? It's not moving. Where is the laptop? Oh, that's too far actually.
Sir, little bit more better.
Okay. So now I'm going to take you back to 6,000 years ago, 6 plus 2, 8,000 years ago. So this is, you know, the advantage. I mean, we materials people always take advantage in saying that the world can be of two parts. One, of course, nobody has seen ever, the spiritual part. You know, anything spiritual world we all talk about, but we haven't seen. Whatever we have seen or been able to touch is the materials world. So we are so important. But the entire history of human civilization can always be traced to the level of exploitation of materials that mankind could do at that period of time. So we begin the journey from, let's say, about 5,000, 10,000 years ago, before Christ's birth. So that's the recorded, or through evidences basically, from the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic period. These are stone ages. So the only implement mankind could use naturally occurring was stone. Subsequently was the Bronze Ages. That's when the first artificial material started. By accident, mankind could lay hand to copper, and subsequently copper got associated with arsenic or some other elements, subsequently zinc and tin. So that came the Bronze Age, and then came the Iron Age. So roughly about 4,000 years before Christ. Since then, we have evidence of mankind making use of iron. I've just made these slides so that they look very attractive. I'm not going to, because otherwise I'll be talking only about archaeometallurgy. So I just picked up these so that you're able to connect yourself to the history. Then India was one of the very few nations which actually was able to produce iron, to some extent steel, not really steel by the present definition, but ferrous materials, to the extent that they were exported. And history has plenty of references to the so-called very famous Damascus steel, but that's basically a supersaturated solution of iron was possible to be produced in that form purely because of the process by which iron was made those days. So it was not the present day blast furnace route of melting and casting. It was primarily through the smelting process, so semi-solid processing route, and because of which a lot of carbon could diffuse in, produce very strong supersaturation of carbon, and in addition, some carbides. So as a result, they actually, the wood steel, the so-called wood steel, basically was prepared in India and exported. And that's how in the Middle East and various other parts, one could make the finest of the steel for swords and other military implements. The first example of iron making was through the efforts of Joshua Marshall in 1830. And in 1874, the first commercial attempt was made by Bengal Iron Works in a place near Asansol, not too far from here. So we certainly have reasons to be, feeling happy that this entire initiative started somewhere around. Now, this is the modern steel making process. I just borrowed it from some internet sources. So you know very well that you basically you need raw material, as I was just mentioning a few minutes ago. Start with iron oxide, you reduce them. So you need a reducing agent, and carbon coke, or is not the pure coal that you lift from the mines. You make it carbon rich, you remove some of the unwanted materials, make it richer in carbon. You charge that, you heat it up and then burn it, and it produces reducing gas, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, then carbon monoxide. That reduces iron oxide, and you produce molten iron, and then that's the blast furnace route, and then subsequently you also dissolve a lot of carbon, which makes the steel brittle or the iron alloy brittle. So subsequently you go through a completely reverse process. Initially you reduce iron oxide, and then you oxidize iron not to make iron into iron oxide, but remove the excess carbon from the molten metal. That's how you make steel. The point that I would like to draw your attention to, not this entire process, but here. 2047, India will be 100 years old. I've been hearing for quite some time that India should produce more than 100 million ton. Now we, of course, have capacity more than 120, 130 million ton. We produce more than 100 million ton, but the country wants to very soon reach the landmark of 300 million ton. And that should go, and that the target is within the next 5 or 10 years. I don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but the overall target is by 2047, India should be a 500 million ton steel producing nation. The overall total capacity in the worldwide is about 1,800 million tons. More than half is produced by one single country. And you can very well guess the country I'm referring to is China. Now, China produces more than 800 to 1,000 million ton. India is second largest producer of steel with hardly about 100, 150 billion ton. But let's not go by numbers, but what is amazing is that I have seen in my own eyes, one single plant in Korea produces 40 million ton, nearly 1/3 of India's total capacity, and entirely automated. The total steel plant will have much less manpower than many of the plants that we operate in. But that's a different issue. So what is important here is that in order to, you know very well that India is one of the very large economies, 5th largest economy in the world. And in order to reach and compete with the likes of US and China, this is also one of the development indices that India should aim at, to be a leader in not only steel production, but also steel consumption. Now, why it is important? I doubt whether the ones from the back, or whether they'll be able to see this. There are two curves. One is sort of red. This is the one which represents the GDP growth. So this is the growth percentage on the y-axis. And these are years. And traced from 1968 all the way to 2018. So nearly about 60 years of profile. And as you see that the steel production, this top line is reflecting the crude steel production, the growth percentage of crude steel production, is roughly similar to the GDP growth. So that is why it is important that India is able to produce 500 million tons of steel in foreseeable future. So in order to, but this has not happened overnight. In 1968, India produced 6.5 million ton. In 2022, this has become 120 million ton capacity. So you can very well see that 2 orders of magnitude growth. And this is growing still faster, and this is important because at the same time, like I was comparing with the GDP growth, in 68 our total GDP capacity was 0.25 trillion. Today we are talking about 1.4 trillion. So again 2 orders of magnitude. So this growth in a period of 60 years is a phenomenal growth. But still it's not enough because we are one of the largest economy in the world, but not necessarily the largest economy. Many of you may not quite know that we often say that India used to be a rich country, and that's why all the big nations from Europe and elsewhere were so keen to come to India. But why was it so? Why everybody wanted to come to India? Because until the early part of the 18th century, India indeed was one of the richest nations in the world, much richer than the US. US didn't quite exist. UK, much richer than many of the European nations. So it is our rightful ambition that we should regain our vantage position in near future. So what are the products? What do we do with steel? We either produce long products or flat products, sheet metals or rods and beams and so on. I mean, these are too much of metallurgy, so there's no need to dwell a lot of time on them. So this is the breakup of these 120 million tons. Where do we use them? We use them for buildings and construction, 57%. So this is where the long products mainly get used. Similarly, when you talk of the flat products, much of it is used in, again, buildings and constructions. And you also need to make motor cars or various other devices. Long products are mostly used in railways and also various reinforcement purpose. Now, it is one thing to talk about the total in terms of tons of steel produced, trillion of dollars of Indian economy, and so on. But what is important is this row in the middle. So India in financial year 2021, certainly, so this is how the capacity is growing. And in 2021, this was it. And in 5 years, the capacity should grow to 161 million ton steel capacity. And by 2031, it should grow to 250. And in another 20 years, another 15 years, it should reach the level of twice the amount. But this is not so important. What is actually more important is the projection, what in terms of the consumption of steel. Like I showed you in some of the sectors where steel is used in buildings. You can't make a building, you can't make a bridge, you can't make a road without, or stadium without steel. So 70 kg per annum per person was the consumption rate in 2021. And this is going to grow, expected to grow to 160. So roughly about, let's say, more than double in about a period of 10 years. But that's not enough, because if it is, let's say, about 100, 120 kg per person now, the world average is 233 kg. So we consume less than half the consumption rate of steel worldwide. If the country's economy needs a big boost, this is exactly why we should not only produce more steel, we should also consume more steel. And how can you consume more steel? You have to build more buildings, more bridges, more roads, more auditoria, more. There's no major civil construction possible without steel reinforcement. So if this is exactly why the steel production and consumption is directly related to the country's economy. Now, if we want to reach there, then what are the major challenges? Now, this is just to tell you that not only we need steel for making such structures, but there are also issues. This is also too much of metallurgy. One of the reasons why, iron is an extraordinary material. If I go purely by tonnage, this is the second largest volume material used anywhere in the world or in any possible applications. The largest would be the concrete by weight, and then by weight will be steel, the second largest used engineering material for these things. But there are issues. I mean, I just thought of listing out the difficulties that we need to address if we want to not only produce but also consume and make use of steel in terms of corrosion, in terms of fatigue, in terms of recycling, and even more important is the other part, which is very often talked about, that and that's something which probably even all of you are aware, that for every ton of steel we produce, we also produce nearly double the amount of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is harmful to the atmosphere because it creates a hole in the upper ozone layer and allows ultraviolet to come directly to the Earth's surface, and which can harm to all the living creatures on Earth. So nobody wants to create a hole in the ozone layer, and hence we should reduce carbon dioxide emission. Now, this never was thought about or never was a concern 100 years ago or 200 years ago, purely because the amount of CO2 that mankind produced by any amount of manufacturing activity could easily be fixed and plowed back into the system by way of photosynthesis. But today the amount we produce is much larger than what we can be fixed, so we need a separate strategy for sequestration. You possibly cannot read, but the biggest offender, if I go by hierarchy, then coal gasification to hydrogen production to cement industries, steel industry, but the biggest offender is the other thermal power plants where we produce electricity. So they actually emit a very large quantity of CO2 per metric ton of whatever we are producing. So what we need is a strategy for fixation. So CO2 emission per ton of finished steel this is how it's growing. We already are aware that something has to be done about it. One possible or possibly the biggest way we can change that scenario is when we don't have to use carbon anymore for producing steel. So I told you that carbon is used because it allows reduction of iron oxide to iron. You extract the iron value from oxide or sulfide or whatever by this reduction process. But there could be even more powerful reducing agent, and that could be hydrogen. So if somebody could produce steel without using carbon but using hydrogen, then the byproduct of that steel making process would be moisture. Nobody would object anything against moisture. So this is not new. I mean, this is a concept which is doing rounds for last 100 years. Still has not been possible. And this is where one has to understand the difference between the science and engineering and eventually technology. Now, what you can prove by virtue of a calculation or an equation or some other argument is not easy to translate immediately into an application. And so theoretically, it is possible. One can easily show that hydrogen can reduce iron oxide, but to be able to use hydrogen for reduction of iron oxide, that too through a pyrometallurgical route, has many, many challenges to be overcome. And always remember that engineering unlike science where you have a linear or nonlinear equation and the solution probably in most of the cases would be unique. But in engineering, no solution is unique. You can produce steel by using carbon as a reducing agent. You can produce by hydrogen as a reducing agent. You can produce by electrolysis. You can produce in multiple ways. But what ultimately stands the scrutiny of the real time is the economics and other social considerations. So what we have to understand is that there are various carbon capture strategies. So where you're emitting carbon dioxide, if you can capture that and fix it in some product which has a commercial value, then only this entire cycle will be feasible. Otherwise, it will only remain as a scientific proposition. I'll skip this part. Again, here I try to say that what are the various plants like cement plants and so on, how are they emitting and how we can try and fix them. So let me now, so the whole idea of touching base, because when I'm in Jamshedpur and I'm talking about engineering solids, and if I don't mention steel, then I think that's not being fair to this land. So I thought of that's why touching upon steel. So the take-home message that I wanted to convey is simple, that we not only need steel, we not only need to produce more steel, we also need to find a way to consume more steel. And if we do that, then the country's economy will get a major boost. But we also have to be aware of a penalty that we have to pay, which is in the form of carbon dioxide. And it's time that we come up with some good strategy. And that's a challenge for the future as to how to take care of the carbon dioxide emission or sequestration. Another sector that's very important is the defense sector, and that's where a large amount of metals and advanced materials, not just metals, even various semiconductor devices are very heavily consumed. And we are very proud that India is doing exceedingly well in terms of our defense capabilities or indigenization of defense capabilities. So this is also one other such example. I thought of showing this to you, that this could be easily, close to a kilometer. It may not be kilometer, but several hundred meters. A vessel which is moving under the water in the sea, and when it dives inside the water, deep inside the water, it doesn't float up for maybe next couple of weeks. So it has to be a complete township inside, where you don't have the possibility of walking out and going to a street corner shop and buy your supply. So it has to have all the electricity, it has to have all the supplies, it has to have all the processing facilities, and so on and so forth. So this is the example of a complete system solution. And India today is one of the very few nations in the world which actually can also run such a submarine, not necessarily through burning fuel, but using nuclear power. So in order to make this kind of a device, you need input from various quarters, not just the steel shell, but the energy devices, the transmission, the various drives, the various other implements, and of course the defense capability. So here again, India is now capable of doing these light combat helicopters. Light combat LCA is a success story, which is already inducted into the force. Various trucks and vehicles and armor vehicles and so on. Each one of them throws a very major challenge, and these challenges are all dynamic. For example, today you create an armor shield, and you feel that that's probably one of the best possible defense shield that one could think of. In no time, maybe in next decade or so, this will be obsolete, because by then the technology elsewhere would have moved ahead, and to an extent that they actually can penetrate even this thick armor plate. Now, when you develop armor plate, you also develop ammunition, which will have a very different strategy. For example, many of the ammunition shells today don't necessarily have very strong, are built with very strong material. They are built with material which are inherently fragile and brittle, so that when they explode, they create lot many more splinters than just carrying the ammunition. So that now allows you to think of a different types of a design aspect, that you create a shell which has a particular geometry and particular material property that will not only carry the ammunition, but when the ammunition bursts, the ammunition will now create many more splinters. And just the other day I heard from one of the defense specialists that today the missiles are created with a philosophy that the explosion takes place after multiple hits. In other words, it penetrates a particular layer, maybe the roof of a building, then the first floor of the building, and the final blast takes place after penetration of these two layers. So that means the entire design of the missile now is very different. So you need to develop materials which will initially allow you to penetrate, so you'll have a much deeper penetration capability, and then the explosion will take place after those two hits. And when it explodes, the entire idea is not only to release the entire energy in one shot, but in stages, and that should allow a very large scale fragmentation of the shell that it carries. So there are multiple challenges that we need to resolve in terms of hardware. I've just listed some of them here, the titanium alloys, the cobalt alloys, the aluminum alloys. In all of these, basically, what I've shown here is the value in which they are growing. So in every such new material development, by the by, I must qualify here, when I say new, I don't necessarily mean by chemistry, I mean by constitution. So for example, when you are thinking of, let's say, a special titanium alloy or a special steel, you change the chemistry, you adjust the composition, but more importantly, you change the microstructure. And as a result, you derive new functionality. And that's where the research is focused today, rather than the alchemist route of all the time changing the composition. Now, these are two special materials I thought I would make a mention, because we all metallurgists are very enamored with these two products, superalloys and margin steel. When I was young and still a student in the college, there was a news item that somebody was arrested in US who was trying to smuggle margin steel out of US for some purpose, defense-related purpose of that country, one of our neighboring countries. Within a few years, I ended up in, I started working in a place called Mishra Dhatu Nigam in Hyderabad, Midhani. And to my surprise, I figured out that I was placed in one of the units called the forge shop, and the material they were forging was called MDN 250, which is nothing but Super Ni 250, or a very high grade of margin steel. So India already was not only producing or melting margin steel, but was able to also supply the special rings for its satellite launching motor casings. Now, why this is important is because these alloys, superalloys or margin steels, they have 6-7 different elements, and they all are very different in terms of their physical properties like density, melting point, reactivity, and so on and so forth. So put all of them together in one solution, just like you take a glass of water and dissolve sugar or salt in it and create one single solution. So in all these cases, when you take them into liquid state, they all are like a single solution. Whether you have element A, B, C, D, E, F, all of them together is a single solution. When you cool, then it follows a certain thermodynamic pattern, and as a result, the phases come out. So instead of, just like sugar crystals can precipitate out of water cooled to in the refrigerator, same way, if you cool to room temperature, the solid alloy can actually allow precipitation of phases from its liquid state. Now, you have to play the game well so that you create a constitution which exactly what you want, and something like this. So we are now talking about creating certain precipitates which should remain coherent, which means the boundaries are invisible. As a result, the strength will be extremely high. But what is the most important fact is that strength is high, not only at room temperature, but even at high temperature, as high as, let's say, 1050 degrees centigrade. When the turbine rotates, the temperature the turbine blade sees actually is 1050 degrees centigrade. So at that temperature, there are very few metals which actually can remain in solid state. Most of them will melt or oxidize. So you need something which not only will withstand the pressure, but also not degrade or deform at that temperature. So these are the two very special alloys, and we are very proud that India produces both of them, and comparable to the rest of the world in terms of quality. But the concern remains about the cost. We have to be able to reduce the cost and be far more competitive. So here, I'm pressing too hard. Here again, in this, one other thing I must mention is that you'll be surprised that these superalloys are mostly nickel or cobalt based, expensive but not so expensive. But the prediction is that the future superalloys will be based on platinum or iridium. So you can imagine that you can justify using platinum or iridium, such noble metals, for making such engineering products, purely because you can derive certain properties which normal materials cannot give you. So what does it mean? It means that engineering always tries to create a solution, find a solution, and in the process creates its own challenge. So today I can withstand 1050 degrees centigrade. Tomorrow, if I want higher thrust to weight ratio in a turbine engine, I would like to create a material which can withstand, let's say, 1150 or 1200 degrees centigrade. So for that, this material may not suffice. So I need material which can withstand and retain strength at that higher temperature. So this is how engineering progresses, and new materials actually are designed and they come up. This is I will give you some other very interesting phenomena. Automobile, we all are, we would all like to drive very fancy cars, and every other day we see very nice campaign of new cars, new designs or something. 50 years ago, the idea was very strong body, like all those Rovers and so on are very strong bodied automobiles, thick sheets, and they would advertise that even if you shoot a bullet, it's not even going to dent. But today, if you compare any automobile, the top of the shelf automobile, the thickness of the sheet is so thin that, leave alone any accident, even by an accidental hit on the car body, you can make an easy dent. Now, why this is important? Again, related to that CO2. I would like to burn as minimum fuel as possible and be able to drive. You want to drive a motor car. You don't want to drive an armored vehicle, right? So you don't need a thick sheet. You need a fancy car looking very nice or something. So give it certain shape and geometry. You'd like to make the steel that you're using as thin as possible, but also be able to give very intricate shape. In fact, if you think carefully, you'll realize that none of the sheets are actually very flat sheet. But the way we develop, way we produce by rolling processes, they come out as very thin sheet, essentially flat in geometry. But now, in order to give a particular shape, like the shape of a door or something, you would like to use a stamping device or an extrusion device, but most importantly, a drawing device. So the steels have to be deep drawable. And in order to make it deep drawable, you need an anisotropic, intentionally an anisotropic property by virtue of which the flow will be more in one direction and not the other. So it will be so you take a flat sheet, you allow a press, and it gives a very complicated shape. It develops a very complicated shape. For while doing that, the deformation will be higher in the vertical 90-degree direction than in other directions. So in order to produce that sheet of that quality, you actually have to remove all the impurity elements, all the interstitial solute elements. To reach to that level, it's not very easy. There's a lot of engineering, lot of technological steps to be followed. And when you develop to that extent, then you are able to develop a particular microstructure which we specially attribute as particular crystallographic texture. I think Sandeep Ghosh Chaudhary must be sitting here. He's an expert in that field. So you produce that texture so that you develop that deep drawable characteristics. So why actually I'm making a mention of this is that the science is known, is proven already. But to reduce the interstitial content to, let's say, 0.1 to 0.01 or even less, much lower than 0.01, maybe in ppm level, you actually need a completely different technology for refinement. And these are the challenges. Electric vehicle is what we all keep hearing about. The challenge mainly is designing of the drive. So in internal combustion engine, you produce power by burning fuel, producing power out of that combustion process, and you have a shaft which takes the power out, and you have a rotor, particular rotor, designed rotor, which transmits the power from the engine to the wheels, and the wheels rotate. So that's the process. In case of electric vehicle, there's no combustion. You have a battery, and the battery gives you the power, and the power should drive the wheels. So the entire drive design is the biggest challenge in electric vehicle than anything else. But another major challenge remains is about the material that we need for battery. And I'm sure many of you know that science is known, but the supply of those materials, particularly lithium, is a major problem, or processing of lithium is a major problem. So this is another big challenge which I think. So I'll skip this part. I just mentioned that the drive design, and in fact, if anybody can come up with a process which is easier than what is known today for processing lithium, people talk about sodium hydride, sodium hydrogen batteries, or instead of lithium batteries and so on. So there's enough room of doing good electrochemistry and then come up with a new battery design. This is proving it. I'm getting So the issue here is, I told that when we want to compete with this rest of the countries which are producing electric vehicles, another challenge is about the charging stations. You know, you want fuel to get your car refueled. It takes a few minutes. You go to the gas station, the fellow comes, and then from the nozzle it takes just a few minutes to.
It's an on button, that's why.
Huh?
So side there is an on button.
Huh.
The
So I'm pressing that by.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. No.
Okay, so we'll control from this.
There are too many barriers, you know. Basically, just see, this is where the technology, we create our own problems. My laptop is sitting 2 rooms inside, in an antechamber, and there are multiple barriers. I'm sending an electronic signal. The signal is getting absorbed in these layers and not able to reach there. So the battery has power, but so when you design something, you have to think of various exigencies. So I was trying to say that when we think of electric vehicles, the drive is very different. We need battery which can store sufficient energy. Then comes a third challenge, that the battery should be charged. So every, let's say, 200, 300 kilometers. So if you're traveling to a large distance, and that too in some different period of the time of the day, you cannot stop in between for 8 hours to recharge your car. So that's also something needs to be done. Of course, there are multiple strategies people talk about, and up and down. I think in terms of energy, I want to touch upon one, throw some figures and then point out the main issue here. India today needs about, let's say about 400 gigawatt hour electricity capacity. Now, 2/3 of that, 66, 67% of that comes from the fossil fuel, coal, gas, and all of them are perilous because they emit carbon dioxide. So the whole world, including India, is very keen to go for an alternative. So we talk about the renewables, and the renewables to a large extent, in fact, nearly 15-20%, actually more than 20% is now through hydropower. India is doing very well in terms of hydropower. There are countries, for example, Germany, which used to have more than 50% of their energy produced, not 50, about 20-30% of their energy produced through nuclear energy. They have decided to, first of all, they have stopped nearly all coal-based power stations, and also nuclear power stations have been dismantled, and they are producing power through solar energy. So India also wants to go in a big way into the solar energy. So the energy harvesting layer, and you know very well that essentially you need an active semiconductor layer, which should be able to couple the incident photon and then convert this, allow that for electronic transition. So you store the incident light into that energy, and either you store in the form of a battery or you connect directly into the grid, and that's how you make use of the electricity. So the challenge here is that from being 67% dependent on one source, how do you gradually shift to the other possible sources without disturbing the grid? India is one of the largest populations, so you cannot ask somebody to wait for a few days to change the power station and then supply the electricity through that. So it is not CO2 emission alone which is the problem. The problem is more into the fact that these are perishable items. There is no, we don't have infinite source of coal, so maybe in another 40, 50 years, the entire, until and unless we come up with new mines, so we will need a replacement. So there are various possible alternative sources. I'll skip these parts, but I wanted to tell you that there's a lot of material challenges in them. The active materials, the structural materials, the transmission materials, and so on. So then let me touch upon another very important factor, the aerospace materials. This is where the single most important criterion is the strength to weight ratio, the specific strength. So you won't be using steel. Nearly 60% of the dead weight of an aircraft is aluminum. Why is it so? Because aluminum is lighter, low density. So the question is that you would like to make it even lighter so that burning the same amount of fuel, you can fly even longer. Now, that's about the structural part, the body part. But of course, you have engines and you have to support there. So there, we are constantly looking for lighter materials, including carbon-based materials. Now, so these are the various, this is in defense, what are the various devices where we are using what amount of aluminum, what amount of steel and titanium, and all these you see the use pattern is changing regularly. So we have to evolve, again, newer materials and newer application strategy. Defect part I'll skip, and just one example which will amply explain why material usage is a major challenge. This is one of the finest innovations of the modern time, the jet engine. You can very well imagine that when you fly at 30,000, 40,000 feet above the sea level, of course, air resistance is very low, but that allows you to fly much faster. And the reason why you remain afloat is because of this engine, which has an air suction part, the compression part, and the combustion part. So this is high temperature, and this is relatively low temperature part. So in this, like I was explaining to you, that if you could burn the same fuel at higher temperature, the thrust that you generate through thermodynamic principle would be higher. So for the same amount of fuel, you can fly longer. So which of course means a lot more economical. But in order to do that, you require materials which are able to withstand that high temperature. So I just picked up a few of these examples, like the seal rings and so in this you have to worry about what materials can withstand to what temperature. So this is the thermal shock resistance. This is how the thermal shock increases. Thermal shock comes from the fact that when you heat up something, it tries to expand and creates a pressure. And if that expansion occurs within a very short frame of time, if you divide by the amount of time, so then that creates a huge impact or a thrust, and that can cause catastrophic failure of the solid. So as you can see that as you increase the temperature, the thermal shock resistance basically becomes larger. So we need materials which are non-metallic, which can withstand larger thermal shock when the temperature is higher. This is the design philosophy, how we choose material. This is strength as a function of temperature. And if you come to this end, so this is how the strength is increasing, this is how the temperature is increasing. So if I go to higher temperature, then I'm looking at materials which are either, if it's fully metallic, very dense, like tungsten. It's so heavy, density-wise, you won't be able to use it for any transportation applications. But on the other hand, you have these ceramic materials, which are nitrides or carbides and so on. They are much lighter, can withstand much longer time, but they cannot withstand the same amount of shock that I was talking about, or the mechanical deformation. So you have to find a good compromise. In many cases, they are not used as a monolith, not a full turbine blade, but a combination of a turbine blade with certain coatings on top of that. So there, so one last challenge, one last example of a major challenge. You know, India is making a lot of progress, not only in ground transportation or aero engines and so on. India is also very keen to create and compete with the rest of the world in terms of creating space shuttles. So we should be able to fly to outer space destinations, maybe a summer vacation in Moon, but you don't want to stay there forever. You would like to come back. So when you want to come back, there you face the biggest problem. As you enter the Earth's atmosphere, you're coming from a very rarefied zone, very low pressure zone, to suddenly a very high atmospheric pressure zone. So there, these points like the leading edge of the wing, the nose cones, leading edge of the fins, they'll have to withstand very high temperature. So 1400 temperature or much in excess of the normal allowable limit of temperature. Now this is a problem because I just showed you a diagram that if I have to go to 1400 degrees centigrade, either I use something which has a much higher melting point like tungsten or tantalum, which are very difficult to deform, very high density. They are not appropriate material. But on the other hand, if I want to go for silicon carbide or nitride, they're fairly brittle. So I can't make an aircraft or a space shuttle out of very brittle material because they'll just disintegrate, they'll fall apart. So then you need a combination. So this is where you use a metallic shell and then you place ceramic tiles on top of that for withstanding very high temperature and very high frictional temperature. For a moment, temperature will rise very high. The problem is that how do you combine them? You can imagine a tile that you use on the floor. How do you join them? You join on the floor very easy because you have only compressive loading. You're walking on the floor. But if it also experiences tensile stress, which is pulling apart, then the joint that you have made with some kind of a cement will fall apart very easily. And if two tiles, which is protecting the space shuttle, falls apart, they fall apart or separate out, then they expose the metal inside. And the metal, if it sees the Earth's atmosphere at the time of re-entry, even for a fraction of a second, it will lead to very rapid rise in temperature to the extent that temperature may shoot beyond melting and boiling temperature, and it can catch fire. Oxidation of metal is usually an exothermic reaction. So if it catches fire or if it raises temperature, then it goes to oxidation state to an extent that it actually will produce more heat by oxidation and eventually will burn. And if it burns, then what could happen is exactly what that happened to the famous or infamous disaster that happened to the Columbia spacecraft carrying Kalpana Chawla. We lost them. So this is one example as to where the hardware needs to be developed and what kind of a major challenge that awaits to be solved. And this is where the engineering comes very, very important. Now, for again, not just the youngsters, the entire population here, I want to throw certain important numbers and make you ponder for a minute. These are important parameters for comparison. 1947, when India was made independent, was born, our GDP was 2.7 trillion rupee. And today we are looking at a very large, right now we are somewhere here. In terms of US dollar, it's 1.4 trillion, and in terms of rupee, it's 262 trillion. And by 2047, when we'll be 100 years from independence, we are seeing at a very larger, much larger number, which essentially means that India will be possibly the second or the third largest economy in the world. Now, where was India's population at the time of independence? Was 340 million. Today we are 1.4 billion. Energy consumption we all want to have a very good life. For example, we are in an air-conditioned room. 50 years ago, when NML was born, maybe this auditorium didn't exist, but hardly any room was air-conditioned. Today, the quality of life is such that everybody is used to certain amenities of life. And everything costs money and energy. So energy per consumption is a good index of understanding the economic growth or quality of life in a country. And you can see that where it is going, it is 2 orders of magnitude higher already from what it used to be at the time of independence. In terms of enrollment ratio, how many students in a particular age group are enrolled for education. This is increasing, and we wish to go even at the tertiary level to over 60%. Infant mortality rate, almost 150 out of 1,000 children born at the time of independence would perish. Today, this is much less than that. So we have made enormous progress in terms of reducing the child mortality rate. Life expectancy is now actually higher than the world average. 68 is world average. The life expectancy in India is 70. I always, as a metallurgist, I have affinity towards steel, so I would like to. So this is where only 1 million ton of steel. Today we are talking about 100 million tons or 120 million, 2 orders of magnitude more. In terms of the aviation market, total amount of roads that we have in the country, though it's not adequate, but still we have made enormous progress in that. Cars production, schools, colleges, number of universities and so on, everywhere things are moving ahead. The question is that despite all this, despite all these progresses, are we totally satisfied at the level of progress? This is also shown to be a major milestone of progress or reality, 1.4 billion people. Nearly 1/5 of the humanity. If you consider China and India, then you're talking about 40% of the population of the world living in these two countries. So on one hand, you have a large family, so you're very happy you have many hands to take part in country's progress, economic development. But on the other hand, you also have too many mouths to feed. And not only that, you would like to also ensure quality of life. And in order to do that, what you have to also worry is it's not enough that we are a 1.4 billion economy, that we are 5th largest economy in the world, and in terms of purchase power parity, we are the 3rd largest. But what is important is that when you compare per capita wise, per capita energy consumption, per capita income, per capita road, per capita vehicles available, or hospitals and schools and colleges, we have miles to go. And though there is a steady increase, but this number in per capita GDP in US dollar. At the time of 2047, this is going to reach somewhere fairly respectable $26,000 per year per head, but still that will be way too low compared to the rest of the world, or at least some of the developed nations. So the fact remains, and this is where the future challenges lie, that we are already the most populous state in the world. We have enormous potential because more than 40% of them are yet to join the profession. So they all will be able to contribute a lot more to the country's economy, including many of you here. But the challenge remains that how are we going to take care of the problems of carbon dioxide emission sequestration? How are we going to take care of the transportation issues, create new aviation devices, make many more electronic products which are necessary, take care of the energy demand, create new energy resources, make the transmission more efficient, and defense sector-wise, we could be comparable with the rest of the world. So obviously, we should end on a happy note that if we have challenges, we also have a lot of resources. So with this, let me end here. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I could give you some ideas, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for such an energetic keynote lecture. Indeed, the lecture is a compendium detailing chronological, comprehensive and future scientific outlook of metallurgy and material science in, and it will be definitely inspiring to our students. So now moving towards end of this inaugural function, now we call in our event coordinator, Dr. Raghuveer Singh, to propose the vote of thanks.
Dignitaries on dais, distinguished invited speakers, students and faculty from the various colleges, my fellow colleagues from NML, representative from media and press, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to me to propose vote of thanks on this occasion. We thank you our chief guest, Professor Indranil Manna, Vice Chancellor BIT Mishra, for readily accepting our invitation and grace this occasion with your distinguished presence. Thank you for your very elaborate lecture, sir, on future challenges of materials and metallurgy and materials, sector-wise and as well as alloy-wise and in perspective of India as well. I'm sure that many of us or all of us have learned and added to our existing knowledge on these issues, these particular area. Thank you very much. Thanks also to you because you have taken early morning travel from Ranchi to Jamshedpur, and that too much before the time and much above our expectation you reached here. Thank you for that. Dr. Avnish Kumar Srivastav, our director, who is actually the torch bearer or flag bearer of this entire event, 1 week, 1 lab campaign that includes this academia meet. Thank you, Dr. Srivastav, for your continuous support and guidance over the few days during planning and execution of the entire plan or campaign. I'm delighted to see so many students and faculty members from various colleges, especially Jamshedpur Cooperative College, Graduate College, Kareem City College, Women's University, Arka Jain University, NIT Jamshedpur, RBS College of Engineering and Technology, and I think Jharkhand Central University as well. Thank you all for showing your interest and being with us this morning. And also thank you to your management who could spare a day to be here. And I'm sure that the learning and gaining experience from this academia meet will make your day worthy. Thanks also to my team members. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible to organize such an event. And it is their tireless efforts to make this event grand success. Thank you, the team members of this academia meet. Thanks to invited speakers, Dr. Preeta Pant, Professor IIT Mumbai, and Dr. Sayan Bhattacharya from ISIR, Kolkata, for accepting our invitation on very short notice. And thank you for traveling from Mumbai and Kolkata to here with us. Thanks also to speaker Dr. Sanjay Kumar, my colleague from NML Jamshedpur. And Sanjay, you kept me reminding that Ghar ki murgi dal barabar. Aisa bilkul nahi hai. You are important to us and we are also eager to hear you as well. Thank you for accepting and making the presentation, which we are going to hear soon. Thanks also to representative from press and media for covering this event, and I know that you have been doing this, covering this event as well as other events of this campaign, 1 week, 1 lab. Thank you for this event, and we are going to see in the next day newspaper how well you covered it. I'm sure you are doing a very good job. Thank you, my colleagues from NML who could witness this function and participated in this inaugural function. I'm sure you will do the same thing in a few more lectures or other activities of the day. Also, thanks to NML Utility Services, AC, janitorial, and canteen, food committees, hall committees, and many other committees who have been supporting us all through the event of 1 week, 1 lab, as well as this academia meet. Thank you very much. Respected Chief Guest Sir, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I thank each one of you for being with us. It's been great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That's end of the inaugural function. Here I would like to request you all to proceed for the high tea. Following that, we will start our lecture session. Sir, please join us for the high tea. The high tea has been arranged in the auditorium foyer area. So students and faculties, please return after 15 minutes having the tea. We will be starting our lecture session within 15 minutes.